إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we're carrying on then with the Prophet's prayer described from Shaykh Muhammad bin Salih Al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala. Last week we mentioned about the obligation of the prayer, that the 5 daily prayers were obligated on the night of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, when the Prophet ﷺ was taken up to the heavens. On that night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obligated the daily prayers upon the Prophet ﷺ and this ummah. Originally, you remember, it was 50 prayers for every day and night. But then when the Prophet ﷺ met with Musa alayhi salam in the 6th heaven, Musa alayhi salam asked him, Bima umirt, what were you commanded with? And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam had highlighted that it was 50 prayers, and Musa alayhi salam continuously told the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam to seek a reduction. And so the messenger continued to go back, and it was reduced and reduced until it became only 5 prayers in the day. Today then, we're going to move on to the chapter which is At-Tahdhir min Idha'ati Salah, the warning from missing your prayers. A warning from missing your prayers. And there are many ayat in the Quran and ahadith in the Sunnah that talk about the prayer and warn against missing the prayer, or being lazy with the prayer, or not fulfilling the prayer as it should be. So one example of that is in Surah Al-Ma'un, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Woe be to the ones who pray, the ones who are lazy. They are lazy in their prayer, they do not pay attention to their prayer. Then a warning has been given against those types of individuals in that ayah or in those ayat. Another example is in Surah An-Nisa, when Allah mentioned, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَهُوَ خَادِعُهُمْ وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسَ وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى. That when they stand to pray, they stand in laziness. They are only showing the people that they are praying. And that was talking about the munafiqun, that the munafiqun, they only used to pray to show the Muslims that they are praying, and they were not upon Islam in reality. They were not Muslims really, only pretending to be Muslims, and they would pray only pretending to pray to show them that they were praying. And so Allah mentions about them that they only stood in laziness and they do not remember Allah except a little. And also in another ayah, مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ that what caused you to be in the fire? They will say, we never used to be from the ones who prayed. They never used to pray, and because of that, they will then be in the hellfire. In another ayah, in Al-Mursalat, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ ارْكَعُوا لَا يَرْكَعُونَ. When it is said to them, bow, they do not bow. When it is said to them to do the ruku', they don't do the ruku', meaning they don't do their prayer. So all of these are to highlight warnings against those who do not pray. It's also mentioned in the Sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Muru awladakum bis-salati wa hum abna'u sab'i sinin." Command your children to pray when they are 7 years old. وَاضْرِبُوهُمْ عَلَيْهَا وَهُمْ أَبْنَاءُ عَشَرٍ. And hit them when they are 10 to pray. So there is a strong commandment in this hadith to get your children to start praying from the age of 7, and then especially from the age of 10. And then of course it's an obligation anyway from the age of puberty. So these narrations, they highlight the importance of that prayer. Then there is a chapter here that talks about the ruling on a person who does not pray. The ruling on a person who does not pray. ترك الصلاة ينقسم إلى قسمين. Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen says, abandoning the prayer falls under 2 categories. Somebody who doesn't pray can be one of 2 categories. أحدهما أن يكون مع جحد وجوبها. One type of person who doesn't pray, it's because he rejects the obligation of the prayer in the first place. Somebody who rejects, refuses to accept the obligation of the prayer in the first place. That type of individual, the ruling on him is that he is a kafir without doubt. No difference of opinion about that. Somebody who rejects the obligation of the prayer, refuses to accept the obligation of the prayer, that individual is a kafir, and there is no doubt about that. لأن جحد وجوب الصلاة المفروضة كفر لتكذيبه الله ورسوله والمؤمنين. Because somebody who rejects the obligation of the prayer, then he is rejecting what Allah has commanded us with, and he is rejecting what the Messenger has told us and what the believers are upon. He is belying them, denying the speech of Allah and the Messenger in regards to the obligation of the prayer. So that is kufr, somebody who rejects the obligation of the prayer. The second type though, الثاني أن يكون ترك الصلاة كسلا وتهاونا مع الإقرار بالوجوب. The second type of person who misses the prayer is somebody who accepts the obligation of the prayer, accepts that it is an obligation to pray, but he doesn't pray out of laziness. He doesn't pray out of laziness, even though he knows and he accepts that it is an obligation to pray. فَهَذَا يُدْعَى إِلَيْهَا. So that type of person, you invite them to pray. You tell them they must pray. وَيُؤْمَرُ بِهَا, and you order that person to pray. فَإِنْ صَلَّى فَذَاكَ, and so if he starts to pray, then that's all good. وَإِنْ اسْتَمَرَّ عَلَى تَرْكِهَا فَقَدْ اخْتَلَفَ الْعُلَمَاء فِيهِ. But if that type of person who knows it's an obligation to pray but doesn't out of laziness, and you tell him he needs to be praying, you order him to pray, but he still doesn't, then the scholars, they differed over that type of person. That's where the difference is between the scholars. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَالْ إِنَّهُ يَكْفُرُ. There are some scholars who say he is a kafir. He is a disbeliever now. Even though he accepts the obligation to pray, but he's refusing to pray. Out of laziness, he's not doing it. And you're telling him, but he's not doing it. So some scholars, they say that is deemed as kufr. That is deemed as disbelief, and he's not a Muslim anymore then. And so that would mean, according to this opinion of the scholars, if a person like that, somebody who believes the obligation of the prayer but doesn't pray out of laziness, somebody like that who then dies upon that state, and they didn't pray even though you told them to pray, then they die as a kafir. And you don't wash their body and shroud them, and you don't pray janazah on them, and you don't bury them in the Muslim graveyard. That is the opinion of many scholars regarding somebody who doesn't pray out of laziness. So remember, there are two categories here. One category is a person who rejects the obligation of the prayer in the first place. That person is a kafir without any difference of opinion. The second type is somebody who accepts the obligation of the prayer but still doesn't pray out of laziness. That type of person, you tell him to pray and encourage him and tell him. If he does start praying, then alhamdulillah, that's all good. If he still doesn't pray out of laziness, that's where the difference of opinion now is. Some of the scholars, they say, based upon his actions now, he's a kafir. And others, they will say, you cannot declare him a kafir. The evidence, دليل قول هؤلاء من القرآن, the evidence that these scholars have to prove that if a person doesn't pray out of laziness is a kafir, the evidences they have, one example of the evidences is the ayah in Surah At-Tawbah, ayah number 11, where Allah said, فَإِن تَابُوا وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ وَنُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. That if they repent and they establish the prayer and they give the zakat, then they are your brothers in religion. So a condition has been placed here that they must repent and establish the prayer until they can then be said, deemed to be your brothers in religion. Meaning, if they don't establish the prayer, then they cannot be deemed as your brothers in Islam. Meaning, therefore, they cannot be deemed as Muslims. And so the one who therefore doesn't pray is not a Muslim. The condition being placed for him to be your brother is that he repents and he prays. So if he doesn't pray, he is not yet your brother in Islam. That's what they say. That's one of the evidences they use. Another example that they use, or further evidence that they use, to highlight that a person who abandons the prayer is a kafir is the hadith of Jabir radiyallahu anhu that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Inna bayna al-rajuli wa bayna al-shirki wal-kufri tarka as-salah." That between a person and shirk and kufr is the abandonment of the prayer. Meaning the thing that distinguishes a person from being Muslim to being kafir is the prayer. If you abandon the prayer, you are now kafir. If you establish the prayer, then you are Muslim. The difference between a person and kufr and shirk is the abandonment of the prayer. Abandon the prayer and you have fallen into kufr and shirk. That is a hadith in Sahih Muslim. Also in the hadith of Buraidah ibn al-Husayb radiyallahu anhu, he said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Al-ahdu alladhi baynana wa baynahum as-salah, faman tarakaha faqad kafar." That the covenant between us and them is the prayer. The barrier between us, the difference between us and them is the prayer. فَمَنْ تَرَكَهَا فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. So whomsoever abandons that has disbelieved. Whomsoever abandons the prayer has disbelieved. Again, a very clear hadith. Whomsoever abandons the prayer has disbelieved. There is another example from Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, at the end of his life, he was stabbed, of course, and that's when he was leading the Fajr prayer, and he was stabbed with a double-sided dagger, and he was stabbed so much that when he would drink milk, it would go down and fall out, pour out from the wounds of his injuries. But the next day when they went to him and he was in that state with all of those injuries and stab wounds, they went to him at Fajr time to awaken him and alert him for Fajr. And he said, "La hadda fil Islami liman taraka as-salah." He said, of course, the prayer. For indeed, there is no share of Islam for the one who abandons the prayer. There is no share in Islam for the one who abandons the prayer. That was the statement of Umar ibn al-Khattab after he had been stabbed and with all those injuries. When they came to remind him of the prayer, he said, absolutely, the prayer. For indeed there is no share in Islam for the one who abandons the prayer. In another statement of Abdullah ibn Shaqiq from the Tabi'een, from the next generation after the companions, he said, كان أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يرون شيئا من الأعمال تركه كفر غير الصلاة. That the companions of the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم did not used to consider any action to be kufr other than the abandonment of the prayer. From the actions and worships that we can do, it was only the abandonment of the prayer that they used to consider as kufr. The abandonment of the prayer, they used to view that as kufr. وهذا يكون كالإجماع بين الصحابة على أن تارك الصلاة يكفر. Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen says this could be considered as a consensus amongst the companions that the one who abandons the prayer has committed kufr. وقد حكى الإجماع على أن تارك الصلاة يكفر غير واحد من العلماء. And there are multiple scholars who hold this opinion who have claimed that there is a consensus upon the fact that the one who abandons the prayer is a kafir. Many scholars have claimed that there's a consensus on that too. Ishaq ibn Rahuya, he is one of them. He is the Shaykh of Al-Imam al-Bukhari. Al-Imam al-Bukhari was his student. Ishaq ibn Rahuya, he said, قال عبد الله ibn Nasr رحمه الله سمعت إسحاق بن راهويه يقول صح عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن تارك الصلاة كافر. He used to say that it is established from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم that the one who abandons the prayer is a disbeliever. وكذلك كان رأي أهل العلم من لدن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى يومنا هذا أن تارك الصلاة عمدا من غير عذر حتى يذهب وقتها كافر. And he said that this is the opinion of the people of knowledge from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam up until his time. He was in the 1st, 2nd century. Up until that time, he says, it is the opinion of all the people of knowledge that the one who abandons the prayer without a legitimate reason, he misses the prayer without a legitimate reason, then that individual is a kafir. A legitimate reason, it could be, for example, somebody genuinely oversleeps, for example, or somebody gets involved in some issue, an accident or something, and there's all types going on, an ambulance and this and that, and by the time they realize after the hospital, the prayer time went. So in those circumstances, you make it up, you can pray. But this is talking about somebody who has no excuse. There is no reason, and they just miss it out of laziness. They just don't get up and pray. Then he says in the early days, the opinion of all the scholars was that such a person is a disbeliever. قال ابن حزم رحمه الله وقد جاء عن عمر وعبد الرحمن بن عوف ومعاذ بن جبل وأبي هريرة وغيرهم من الصحابة رضي الله عنهم أن من ترك صلاة فرض واحدة متعمدا حتى يخرج وقتها فهو كافر مرتد ولا نعلم لهؤلاء من الصحابة مخالفا. He said that it has been narrated from Umar and Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf and Mu'adh ibn Jabal and Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhum, all of them companions, that it's been narrated from them that whoever misses a single obligatory prayer on purpose, meaning out of laziness, he knows the time is going, it's going, he just doesn't get up and pray. On purpose he misses the prayer, a single prayer, and the time goes, then they said, we do not know anybody from the companions who opposes the opinion that such a person is a kafir. Such a person is considered as a disbeliever. And it's also mentioned from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ibn Abbas and Jabir ibn Abdullah and Abu Darda radiyallahu anhum, all of them from the companions as well. These same opinions are mentioned from them. And Ibn al-Qayyim said, إنه يستحيل في العادة والطبيعة أن يكون الرجل مصدقا تصديقا جازما أن الله فرض عليه كل يوم وليلة 5 صلوات وأنه يعاقبه على تركها أشد العقاب وهو مع ذلك مصر على تركها هذا من المستحيل قطعا. Ibn al-Qayyim said, to highlight as well how somebody who abandons the prayer is a disbeliever, he said it is impossible to think, that in reality it is impossible to think, and it goes against the nature of a person who knows and believes with certainty that the prayer is an obligation. Somebody who knows and believes with certainty the prayer is an obligation from Allah and believes in that these are 5 daily prayers, we have to pray, we're supposed to pray them every day. Somebody who knows that and knows that there will be a severe punishment for abandoning it and not praying it, knows there will be a severe punishment from Allah upon such a person, and yet after knowing all of that still abandons the prayer, then this Ibn al-Qayyim said it's impossible. How could that be? It could not be, it could not occur from a believer. A believer who knows it's obligatory and knows that Allah will punish you upon it, knows all of that, and still abandons the prayer and doesn't bother. He said, how could that be? So this is all to highlight that position that an individual who abandons the prayer on purpose, laziness, and doesn't get up and pray, then that individual is considered a disbeliever. So according to that opinion then, that type of person dies as a non-Muslim. You don't wash him, you don't shroud him, you don't bury him in the Muslim graveyard, you don't do any janazah on him. That is the opinion of a great number of scholars. There is, of course, another opinion, and the other opinion is that a person who abandons the prayer out of laziness is not a kafir, is not considered a disbeliever. And they have some evidences too. One of the evidences they use is about the shafa'ah on the Day of Judgment, where it's mentioned in the hadith, Allah will say, go and take out of the hellfire somebody who has the most smallest amount of iman, and did not do any actions even, or hardly any actions. And so some of the scholars, they say this would seem to indicate that even those people who had some iman, the tiniest of iman, without barely any actions they were doing, so barely even the 5 prayers they were praying, was still being taken out of the hellfire to paradise, indicating therefore that a person does not become a kafir for abandoning the prayer out of laziness. Yes, it's a severe and major sin. Severe and major sin. And we know that on the Day of Judgment, the first thing that you are held accountable on is your prayer. That is the first thing that you are asked about. But that is the opinion some of the scholars they have, that a person would not be deemed as a disbeliever if he didn't pray. But others, and it's a very strong opinion, that the person is deemed as a kafir, deemed as a non-Muslim if they don't pray their 5 daily prayers. And that's from the basics of the religion, the second highest pillar of Islam, the 5 daily prayers. 5 daily prayers. There is that story we mentioned before about a magician who used to do all types of things, and his neighbor used to see all of the magic that his magician neighbor used to do. So that neighbor went to the magician, to his neighbor, and said to him, how can I be a magician like you? The magician said to him, go to this lake at Maghrib time and you'll get your instructions. So the person went to the lake at Maghrib time, sunset time, and some creatures emerged, came out from the lake. And they said to him, the first thing you have to do, the first step for you to become a magician like your neighbor, if that's what you want to do, first step, miss the Maghrib prayer which is coming in right now. Miss the Maghrib prayer, then we'll get on to the next step. And so that man, even though he was a commoner, this is a true story, happened not maybe long ago. One of the scholars of Saudi Arabia mentioned it to us. That man was a commoner, but the one thing that he did know was the importance of the prayer. His parents had raised him upon praying the 5 daily prayers. And so that man, even though he may not have had much knowledge about anything else, when those creatures told him, abandon the prayer, miss your Maghrib, and then we'll continue talking, he said he ran away from the lake because he knew that was wrong. He knew it was not right to miss any of the prayers, and he could not bring himself to miss any of the prayers. And the prayer is not excused under any circumstance. So we're going to get to that later on. Even if a person was unable to stand up, we're going to get to the hadith inshallah, you can pray sitting down. And even if a person is incapable of sitting down, you can pray lying down. And even if a person is completely paralyzed in his body, neck down, paralyzed, cannot move any body parts, you still pray. And the scholars, they say, use your eyes, move your eyes a bit lower for the ruku', move them even lower for the sujood, move them back up again for standing. Pray with the movement of your eyes, even if you're paralyzed and cannot move the rest of your body. And we're going to come and see the other conditions too. Even if you could not find the direction of the Qibla, maybe you're out somewhere in the forest, somewhere you can't even find the direction of the Kaaba. You're trying and you don't know. Then in the end, once you've tried and tried, pray. When you've made your best guess, just pray. You can't miss the prayer and say, well, I can't work it out, I'm going to have to leave it for now, and then even though the prayer time's going to go, later on when I find out where the direction is, I'll pray then. No. Pray. Work out the best of your ability where the direction is and pray. So the prayer is not excused even in jihad. Prayer is still an obligation. When you're in jihad, and even then you must pray. Yes, the method of praying in jihad is different. There's a different way of how you pray, but you must still pray. So this all indicates the greatness and the virtue and the station and the rank of the prayer. So according to this opinion, as we said, many scholars, they say if you abandon the prayer out of laziness, you're a kafir. That would mean, according to this opinion then, that would mean if a person now is not praying out of laziness, he knows you have to, but out of laziness he doesn't do it. You keep telling him, but he doesn't do it. Then in the end, according to these scholars, that person, if he's married, his marriage becomes null and void. His marriage becomes null and void. He's no longer married to his wife. It is nullified his marriage because he's become a kafir. He's become a kafir, and so the marriage is made null and void. If that person sacrifices like an Eid or Aqiqah or some type of sacrifice, you cannot eat that meat because it has been sacrificed by a kafir. You would not be allowed to eat the meat that he sacrifices. And when it comes to the death, as we mentioned, you would not wash him, you would not pray the janazah upon him, you would not be able to make dua for him, you would not bury him in the Muslim graveyard along with the Muslims, and it would not be permissible for his children who are Muslim to take inheritance from him. You cannot take inheritance from kafir parents. If the parents are disbelievers and the children are believers, The parents die, the children do not take the inheritance from the disbelievers. So all these things would come into action if a person died abandoning the prayer out of laziness. And it's mentioned in a narration, إِنَّ آخِرَ مَا تَفْقِدُونَ مِنْ دِينِكُمْ الصَّلَاةِ. The last thing that you abandon from your prayer, from your religion, is your prayer. Meaning a person could be lazy and not fast. You're still a Muslim. He could be miserly and not give the zakat. Still Muslim. He could be lazy and miserly and doesn't want to spend the money even though he's got it to go and do Hajj. Still Muslim. But if he leaves the prayer, now no longer Muslim. That's what the narration means. The last thing that leaves you from your religion is your prayer. When your prayer's gone, your religion's gone. Whereas the other things, a person could be lazy and not fast, but your religion is still there, you're not a kafir. A person could be miserly or lazy and can't be bothered to go and do Hajj even though he's got the means, he would still be Muslim. But at the end of it all, when the prayer goes, he's not praying anymore, that's it. That's the last straw, as they say. If you stop praying, your religion's gone. So this is the level of importance regarding the prayer. The level of importance for establishing the 5 daily prayers, particularly for a person to be careful when it comes to the Fajr prayer and it comes to the Isha prayer, the early and the late. A person must guard over the 5 daily prayers. They cannot be missed at all. Then we come to the next chapter, which is now going to start telling us about the conditions of the prayer, so that we now understand how to pray properly. So far, those were introductions telling us about the importance of the prayer, when it was obligated, etc. Now we're going to get into the actual details of the prayer itself. The first chapter is about the conditions of the prayer. A condition, the meaning of it is something that is required by necessity for the validity of something else. A condition is something that is needed by necessity for the validity of something else. Meaning without that condition, this other thing would not be valid. That's a condition. So the prayer has certain types of conditions, meaning you've got to do those certain types of things in advance. They are prerequisites that have to be done for the prayer to be valid. If you don't do these conditions, then your prayer is not valid. That's what the conditions of the prayer are. Things that you have to do for your prayer to be valid. The first condition, and this is the biggest condition. There are a few conditions of the prayer. The biggest condition of the prayer, for the prayer to be valid, is what? Sincerity for all the actions generally. But there's something specifically for the prayer. The biggest condition that is specific to the prayer, for the prayer to be valid, your prayer wouldn't be valid otherwise. Wudu is one of them, but it's not the biggest one. Anybody? The time. The time of the prayer is the biggest condition of the prayer. The prayers have to be prayed in their accurate times. That is the biggest condition of the prayer. دخول الوقت وهو أهمها. That the prayer time has to have entered, and that is the greatest of the conditions for the prayer. Other aspects, even other conditions, could be dropped to maintain this condition. For example, like we often give the same kind of example, imagine you're out in the forest somewhere, you're camping, and you run out of water, and there's no water available nearby, the next village is miles away, there's no streams or nothing there. So now it's impossible to make wudu. In fact, wudu you can make tayammum. Let's give the example of the clothes. You're camping and overnight you are robbed. You're out in the forest somewhere camping. Somebody comes overnight and they rob you. They take your tent, they take all your gear, they take even the garments off your back. Leave you with absolutely nothing. Nothing to even cover yourself with. And it's time for the prayer right now. But one of the conditions of the prayer is to cover yourself. The awrah, we'll get to that. But now, the time of the prayer is soon about to exit. There's only 10, 20 minutes left. And the prayer time's going to finish for that particular prayer. But you haven't got any garments to cover your awrah. What do? You pray. Pray as you are, because the condition of the time takes priority over other conditions. So this is the biggest condition, the entry time of the prayer. And it's important to note that this condition should be phrased as the entry time. Because sometimes the prayer can still be valid after the time has gone. Sometimes that is possible. Like if you're traveling when you're gonna combine Maghrib and Isha, you can take the Maghrib out of its time and pray it with Isha. So sometimes after the time the prayer can still be valid. But the point is the entry time and the time of the prayer, that is the biggest condition. What is the evidence that this is a condition? That you can't just pray the prayers anytime you want. You cannot just pray a prayer before the time has started yet. Your prayer would be invalid. Right now, we can't just pray Maghrib right now. There's still an hour to go before Maghrib. We cannot just pray Maghrib right now. It would be invalid and it wouldn't count. So the evidence for that is in the Quran. There is an ayah in the Quran where Allah said, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. That indeed the prayer is established upon the believers upon fixed times. كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. Upon fixed times. فَلَا تَصِحْ الصَّلَاةِ قَبْلَ الْوَقْتِ وَلَوْ كَانَ الْإِنسَانُ جَاهِلًا نَاسِيًا. So the prayer cannot be valid prior to its time starting, even if you do it out of ignorance. Or you do it forgetfully. Ignorance, maybe you just think that the prayer time has started and you pray. But then later on when you're looking at the calendar or you realize that the prayer time hadn't even started when I prayed. Your prayer is invalid. You can't say, but it was ignorance. I thought at the time the prayer time had started. You cannot. If you prayed before the prayer time, then you realize now you have to repeat that prayer. It's invalid. You prayed it before the time of the prayer had started. So then the question obviously now is, what are the prayer times? If the biggest condition of the prayer is that you must pray it when the time starts, what are the starting times and the end times for each prayer? So beginning with Fajr, Waqtul Fajr. من طلوع الفجر أي إذا تبين إلى أن تطلع الشمس فالأفق مظلم كل الليل فإذا دنت الشمس من الناحية الشرقية من الأفق بان نور الشمس فإذا تبين في الأفق ممتدا من الشمال إلى الجنوب فهذا دخول وقت صلاة الفجر. Fajr time, they have what is known as the false dawn and the true dawn. The false Fajr and the true Fajr. At night, it is dark, pitch black. Then, when you're getting closer and closer to the morning, to the sunrise time, the first light that you see, the first light that appears, is a light that appears vertically up into the sky. In the horizon, you will see a light that appears vertically up into the sky. That is known as the false Fajr. That will disappear. And it will become black again and dark again. Then the light will appear again on the eastern horizon. And this time it will appear horizontally across the horizon. Horizontally across the horizon. That light, when it appears horizontally across the eastern horizon, that is now the start of Fajr. That is how the Fajr time is determined, by the light appearing horizontally across the horizon. That is the start of the Fajr time. And normally, from that time up until sunrise actually occurring, normally it's going to be an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes, somewhere in that region, depending on the seasons and the places. That's Fajr. And so obviously it carries on up until sunrise. From the point of sunrise onwards, Fajr time has ended. The second prayer, Dhuhr. When does the time for Dhuhr begin? من زوال الشمس إلى أن يصير ظل كل شيء مثله زائدا على فيء الزوال. So in the east, the sun comes up. And it comes up and up and up until it gets to the middle of the sky. When it gets to the middle of the sky and then goes just past the middle of the sky, so now it's been coming up on the eastern horizon and it dips just into the western horizon. Dips just into that side, goes just past the middle of the day. Now, Dhuhr time has started. When it goes past the zenith, the meridian, the middle of the day, goes past that onto the western horizon, meaning your shadow will now start to appear on the eastern side of yourself, because the sun is now heading to the west side. That is now Dhuhr time. When does Dhuhr time end? Anybody? When the shadow of an object becomes 2 times itself. That is an opinion of some scholars. But the strongest opinion is that Dhuhr time ends when the shadow of an object is equal to the object. As soon as the shadow starts to become bigger than the object itself, now Asr time has started. That is the strongest opinion. When the shadow of an object is equal to itself, plus that tiny amount of the sun going past the middle of the day, equal to itself plus that tiny amount, now the Dhuhr time has ended, Asr time has begun. When does Asr time end? When does Asr time end? Anybody? Asr time? When does Asr time end? Shadow of an object is less than its actual size. That means you're still in. You're still in Dhuhr time. Because the shadow, when it becomes equal and starts to get bigger than itself, that's when Asr starts. So when does Asr end? Anybody?
There's no more shadow.
So that means the sun has set. So that means you're saying when Maghrib time starts. That is an opinion that Asr time carries on all the way until sunset, until Maghrib starts. But many of the scholars have another opinion, and they say that Asr time ends when the sun becomes the hazy, yellowy orange. In the summer, you notice it. When it's getting close to Maghrib time, and you look across in the western horizon, you see all the orange and the haziness and the yellow, and you can look almost directly into that direction. You're seeing all of those colors like that. The scholars, they say when it gets like that, Asr time has ended. That's usually maybe 20 minutes, half an hour before actual sunset. When it becomes that kind of hazy yellow and orange, and you see all of those colors where it's about to go down. Scholars say when you see that, Asr time has ended. Others, they say, no, it carries on up until actual sunset. And Maghrib then begins. But this group of scholars, they say, it ends when you see the yellowness, orangeness, haziness of the sun. They say you can still pray Asr after that, up until actual sunset, but that is only out of necessity. If you were for some reason unable to pray before that yellowness, orangeness occurred, if you were unable for some reason, then you can still pray after that time up until sunset. It's still not Maghrib yet, so you can carry on out of necessity. But out of choice, you should not delay the Asr that late. So then, when it is sunset, Maghrib time begins. And when does Maghrib time end? When sun goes down, the Maghrib time begins. But when does Maghrib end? So when the sun goes down, does it become pitch black straight away? Of course not. After Maghrib, the sun has gone down, it's still light outside. There's a hadith, the companions, they used to pray Maghrib. We'll come to it later. They used to pray Maghrib, and when they finished the Maghrib prayer, they would come out of the mosque, and if they shot an arrow, they would still be able to see where the arrow goes and where it lands. This was after they had finished the Maghrib prayer and come out of the mosque. They would shoot an arrow and they could still follow it and see where it lands. Meaning there was still enough light. If you shoot an arrow at night when it's dark, you can't see where it goes. But after Maghrib prayer, they shot it and they could still see where it went. Because after the sun goes down, it doesn't become pitch black yet. There is still light left over. And when the last bit of that light, the twilight, when the last bit of that redness disappears and it becomes black, that's when Maghrib time has now ended and Isha time has now started. So you're looking for the end of the light in the western horizon, that last bit of light left over, the redness left over, that twilight when it disappears and becomes black. Now Maghrib has ended and Isha has begun. Then when does Isha end?
Half the night.
Half of the night is an opinion of some of the scholars. Half of the night, that doesn't mean midnight. Half of the night means from when Maghrib starts to when Fajr starts, divided by 2. So, for example, like in the winter, if Maghrib is at 5 p.m. and Fajr is at 5 a.m., for example. 5 p.m. is Maghrib, 5 a.m. is Fajr, 12-hour night. Therefore, 6 hours is half of the night. So from Maghrib, 6 hours is what time? 11 p.m. You'd be able to pray Isha up until 11 p.m. That's half of the night. Half of the night does not mean midnight, it means literally half of the night from the sunset to the Fajr time. That's one opinion. There's another opinion that says a third of the night. Do the same calculation, but a third only. Another opinion says 2/3 of the night. And there is an opinion that says actually you can carry on praying Isha all the way up until Fajr time starts. Because there is a hadith where Jibreel alayhi salam came and taught the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the starting times of the prayers and the ending times of the prayers. And so the scholars, they said, one prayer simply continues up until the next prayer, with the only exception being Fajr. Fajr stops at sunrise. But Dhuhr starts and then carries on all the way up until Asr starts. Asr carries on all the way up until Maghrib starts. Maghrib carries on all the way up until Isha starts. Isha carries on all the way up until Fajr starts. So they say every prayer carries on all the way up until the time for the next prayer starts, except Fajr. So that is one opinion. You can pray the prayers all the way up until the next prayer time starts, and you're still within the previous prayer time. But other opinions they mention about the Isha, no, it's not all the way till Fajr, it's only half of the night or 2/3 of the night. And also with Asr, that it's not all the way up until Maghrib, it's only up until when that sun becomes yellow or orange, haziness, that's prior to the sunset by a short while. So those are the timings of the prayers. Next time we'll talk about the issue of within those times, when is the best time to pray? So for example, Dhuhr comes in, for example, at 1 p.m. and Asr comes in, for example, 4 p.m. When is the best time to pray Dhuhr? At 1 p.m. or at 3:30 p.m. or at 2 p.m.? When in that time frame should you pray each prayer? Each prayer has a time frame. When should you pray each prayer within its time frame? Should it always be at the beginning? Or are there some exceptions where some prayers should be at the end? That's what we'll start with from next week. Class is on next week again, inshaAllah. And remember, it's the earlier time, 7:30 p.m. We'll start again at 7:30 p.m. next week on Friday, inshaAllah. Any questions up to there so far then? Any questions on any of that?
I had a question about, how we use calendars to specify exactly when to pray. Is that sort of like a loose rule then, based on these narrations?
Yeah, the calendar is not absolute. The calendar is, they make estimations of roughly the times. If the calendar has been judged upon somebody actually going out there and checking and verifying and doing all of that, then it's a bit more accurate perhaps. But they are general times. It's not a specific thing, that calendar. You cannot say these are the exact times Dhuhr comes in, the exact time Asr comes in. It's a guideline more than anything else. That's the rough time of Dhuhr, so don't pray before that. Let that come in. After that, pray your prayer. That's the guideline. Anybody else? All right, we'll stop on that for today. Then, inshallah, next Friday, 7:30 p.m., we'll carry on with the next section. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.